Welcome to the official United Nations observance of International Women's Day 2021. This year's theme is Women in Leadership, Achieving an Equal Future in a COVID-19 World on the Way to the Generation Equality Forum. Sign language interpretation and closed captioning in English is available in your settings. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, Excellency, speakers, and everyone watching today. My name is Sophia Pieng-Antoine, and I am a young activist from Haiti, currently working at the International Organization for Migration, former co-chair of the board of directors of Frida Young Feminist Fund, and a member of the YWCA. And I have the privilege of being your moderator for today's International Women's Days program. Happy International Women's Day to all of you, and thank you so much for joining. Just this time last year, we celebrated the accomplishments since the Fourth World Conference of Women in Beijing over 25 years ago. This year, we'll focus on the present and the future as we recognize the importance, power, and outright need for women's leadership to attain good governance, sustainable development, and progress towards full gender equality in a COVID-19 world. Women's leadership is undeniably key to the COVID-19 response and recovery. Whether as scientists, frontline workers, or at the highest level of governments, where many of the countries that have been successful in responding to the pandemic are headed by women. One of my all-time favorite quotes and personal life motto is by Audre Lorde. She said, and I quote, "I am not free while any woman is unfree, even when her shackles are very different from my own." And I think that this pandemic and the inequalities that it brought to light and increased, and the setbacks in human rights that came with it, has really illustrated the essence of this statement. There is hope, however, as feminist activists of all ages, abilities, races, genders, religions, ethnicities, sexualities, and with all the richness that this diversity brings, continue to fight every day for a more just and equal world. I hope that today's program will inspire you and encourage you to do your part. Today's celebration will include a special message by Golden Globe nominated and SAG Award winning actress, philanthropist, and Time's Up founder Eva Longoria, some wonderful musical guests throughout the program, and a special performance by some of Broadway's best at the very end. We will first hear from an array of gender champions celebrating women's leadership in all its forms. You will then also learn more about the exciting upcoming Generation Equality Forum to be co-hosted by Mexico and France as we officially unveil the key initiatives of the Generation Equality Action Coalitions and the Women, Peace and Security and Humanitarian Action Compact. It is a privilege and honor to introduce our first speaker to open today's program. Since taking office, he has prioritized the dismantling of gender inequality both within and outside of the UN. He has significantly increased the representation of women at the highest level of the UN, recognizing that the meaningful inclusion of women in decision-making increases effectiveness and productivity, brings new perspectives and solutions to the table, unlocks greater resources, and strengthens efforts across all three pillars of the UN's work: human rights, peace and security, and development. Please join us in welcoming the Secretary General of the United Nations, Mr. Antonio Guterres.
Today, we celebrate the women of the world who are leading their countries and communities through the urgent crisis caused by COVID-19. Over the past year, countries with women leaders are among those that have suffered fewer deaths and put themselves on track for recovery. Women's organizations have filled crucial gaps in the provision of services and information on the pandemic, especially at the local level. And women peace builders have played a vital role in public health messaging in low trust and conflict-affected communities. 70% of frontline health and care workers are women, many from racially and ethnically marginalized groups and at the bottom of the economic ladder. Yet, even as women have played critical roles during the pandemic, we we have seen a rollback in hard-won advances in women's rights. The regression harms women and girls above all, but it also harms everyone and all our work for peace and prosperity. In this decade of action to deliver the Sustainable Development Goals, we must turn things around. As we look to this year's Generation Equality Forums in Mexico City and Paris, we have many challenges to overcome. Too often, services are delivered by women, but decisions are made by men. Just 22 countries have a woman as head of state or government, just 21% of ministers are women, and women parliamentarians make up less than 25% of national legislators. Women have an equal right to speak with authority on the decisions that affect their lives. This is how we will ensure that decisions are inclusive and reflect the needs of the entire population. This is how we will rebuild from a pandemic that has made gender inequality worse, that has pushed more women into poverty, out of jobs, and away from access to educational and medical services, including for sexual and reproductive health. This is how we will solve the urgent challenges of our time, from the pandemic to climate change, to deepening inequalities, conflict, and democratic backsliding. Gender equality is essentially a question of power. But equal power will not happen in itself. This is still a male-dominated world with a male-dominated culture. We need to work together with vision and determination to make equality happen. I'm proud that we have achieved gender parity in UN leadership posts for the first time in history. We must transform social norms. We must put in place laws and policies to support women in leadership, including special measures and quotas with ambitious targets, and do far more to appoint women to high-level positions. We must tackle violence against women, both online and offline, so that women's voices are no longer silenced, especially in public life. We must increase access to financing for women candidates, women's organizations, and feminist movements. And we must support women leaders in all their diversity and abilities, including young women, migrant women, indigenous women, women with disabilities, women of color, and LGBTIQ+. The COVID-19 has been a calamity for the world and for women and girls. But it has also forced a reckoning with global inequalities, fragilities, and entrenched gender discrimination. Women must be at the center of the recovery as we make the course corrections that the pandemic has highlighted so vividly. This is a job for all of us. I look forward to working with all of you to advance women's leadership, to achieve women's rights, and to build a future based on equality and dignity for all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Secretary General. It was great to hear you highlight the role of women and young women peace builders in fighting COVID, the role of women healthcare workers, especially as many of them are migrants, the importance of ensuring access to sexual and reproductive health, and of course, the need to finance feminist movements. You are and continue to be an inspiration to the world. Our next speaker has made gender equality and the empowerment of women one of his top priorities during his tenure and has formed a gender advisory group on gender equality and women's empowerment to inform and help foster gender equality during the 75th session of the UN General Assembly. Please welcome the President of the General Assembly, His Excellency Volkan Bozkır.
Since the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action was adopted 25 years ago, we have made some progress in advancing women's rights, yet no member state has achieved gender equality. In 2021, 2/3 of all illiterate adults are women, and the digital divide threatens to leave even more women behind. Labor market segregation persists, as does the gender pay gap. Women still shoulder the disproportionate burden of unpaid care, with the so-called second shift now overlapping for many women who are working from home as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. Furthermore, the shadow pandemic of gender-based violence rages behind closed doors during lockdowns. This decade of action to implement the Sustainable Development Goals is our chance to course correct. Here, in the General Assembly, I am working to mainstream gender equality with the support of the newly established Gender Advisory Group. I urge all member states to mainstream gender equality through women's participation, as it is clear that women's unequal representation in decision-making processes, including COVID-19 recovery planning, has led to the specific needs of women being overlooked. For today, only 25% of parliamentarians are women. Yet 2.5 billion women and girls are affected by discriminatory laws. We must expand space for civil society leaders and feminist advocates in decision-making at all levels and end violence against women in politics and public life. On this International Women's Day, I call on all member states to guarantee women what I think of as the 5 Ps. First, personal autonomy. Second, equal participation in decision-making and politics. Third, gender-responsive policies. Fourth, equal pay and access to the labor market. 5, an end to impunity for perpetrators of gender-based violence. It is up to each of us to uphold the rights of all women and to make generation equality a reality. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Excellency. And thank you for reminding member states of the importance of gender mainstreaming and the 5 Ps. All of you watching at home or at work today, did you know that CSW is right around the corner? Next week, we'll kick off the 65th session of the Annual Commission on the Status of Women. My first CSW back in 2015, I remember being in such awe of the sheer power of having so many feminist activists from different backgrounds in the same space with a common goal, and finding ways to work with governments and advocate to shape their commitment. The priority theme for this year's session is women's full and effective participation in decision-making in public life, as well as the elimination of violence, for achieving gender equality and the empowerment of all women and girls, a theme that is closely tied to what we are celebrating today. We are pleased to have the chair of the 65th session of the Commission share some remarks with us today. Let's hear from His Excellency, Mayor Margarian.
Excellencies, distinguished delegates, friends. I'm very pleased to join you today on the occasion of the United Nations observance of International Women's Day 2021. As you have heard, this year's theme for International Women's Day is closely aligned with the priority theme of the upcoming 65th session of the Commission on the Status of Women, which will begin next week. Traditionally, this observance gives us the opportunity to reflect on the gains made so far for women and girls globally, while also recognizing that more work needs to be done. However, 2020 has been a watershed year in modern world history. The COVID-19 pandemic has disrupted all our lives and disproportionately impacted women and girls across the world. The effects of the pandemic can be seen across the many dimensions of their lives. It has aggravated the suffering of women and girls in situations of conflict, humanitarian crisis, and other fragile contexts. Maternal mortality, gender-based violence, and the burdens of unpaid care work on women are significantly increasing as a result of the crisis. While all students alike are impacted by school closures, we know that women and girls who are pulled out of educational institutions are less likely to return than men and boys. Female workers are rapidly losing employment opportunities as a result of the pandemic's devastation of national economies. Women in the informal sector are even more negatively impacted. The COVID-19 crisis puts the priority theme of CSW 65, which is women's full and effective participation and decision-making in public life, as well as the elimination of violence for achieving gender equality and the empowerment of all women and girls, into sharper relief. Even beyond the effects of COVID-19, women continue to be underrepresented in decision-making and public life, and violence against women in all its forms is rampant. The statistical data shows that women are the heads of state or government in only 21 countries. 119 countries have never had a woman leader. At the current rate, parity at the highest levels of power will not be reached for another 130 years. Beyond the headlines, women continue to face many obstacles in public life and are marginalized from equally and fully participating at all levels of decision-making positions. We cannot but think of the millions of female workers and caretakers in almost all dimensions of public, private, and economic life who, whilst enduring the effects of the crisis, are working tirelessly to uphold their families and their communities, often without recognition or compensation. In the past year, women have also offered new models of effective and inclusive leadership, be it in politics and governance or healthcare and emergency response. At the end of 2020, the Harvard Business Review released an assessment which rated women more positively on 13 out of 19 competencies that comprise overall leadership effectiveness in times of deep crisis. In the same assessment, men were rated more positively on one competency, technical professional expertise. Women rated higher everywhere else on human relations skills such as motivating a workforce and on achieving better collaboration and teamwork. It is critical that the global response to and recovery from COVID-19 crisis actively engages women and harnesses their unique capacities for leadership. Without the leadership and equal participation of women, the road to recovery from the pandemic will be even harder. To lead, women must be educated, allowed to reach their full potential, and manage their responsibilities effectively. As we mark International Women's Day, I call on all of us to take concerted action to accelerate women and girls' leadership and participation to ensure that together we transform the world and shape a more equal future for humankind. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. And thank you for mentioning the burden of unpaid care work on women significantly increasing during COVID. I'm sure many of us were able to see this, even within our own households, as women's invisible labor grew, from childcare and homeschooling, to caring for ill or elderly family members, to household chores, while trying to navigate employment or unemployment burdens. Now, it is a joy to introduce you to the next speaker, the former Deputy President of South Africa, who has led UN Women since 2013. This quote from her says it all about her focus, dedication, and resolve. And I quote, "Now is the time for giant steps. We cannot afford baby steps anymore. It cannot be incremental change. We want change that is fast, but also it must be change that lasts." We welcome these remarks from the Undersecretary General of the UN and Executive Director of UN Women, Phumzile Mlambo Nguka.
Excellency Antonio Guterres, Secretary General of the United Nations. Excellency Volkan Usikir, President of the General Assembly. Excellency Meher Magarian, Chair of the Commission on the Status of Women. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, on this International Women's Day 2021, we stand on a crossroads as we ponder the recovery from a pandemic that has had disproportionate impact on women and girls. We also face the challenge of underrepresentation of women in key institutions, some of which will be responsible for the recovery. The recovery will not be adequate and inclusive if it does not include women in decisions that affect their lives. As we go into the Commission on the Status of Women, we have an opportunity to call for representation of women in all decision-making bodies. We only have 13% of parliaments that are gender equal. 119 countries have never had a woman leader. We also have 14 gender equal cabinets in the world. These are all important bodies that will be making decisions about the future of the world and will be guiding this recovery. We therefore have a responsibility to call out on the representation of women. In 2020, when we marked 25 years of the implementation of the Beijing Platform for Action, heads of states lamented the underrepresentation of women in their countries. This is the time to address this underrepresentation and in the agreed conclusions of CSW to make bold recommendations. We will also have generation equality, which will help in taking measures and steps that will help the recovery and the implementation of SDGs. This, again, is an opportunity that cannot be missed. Exclusion of women in decisions that affect their life is bad corporate governance. It should not be allowed. This is why, at this point in 2021, when we are at crossroads, we have to bring this to an end. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Madam Executive Director. And thank you for calling out the lack of women in most countries' decision-making bodies. As you said, exclusion of women in decisions that affect their lives is bad governance and should not be allowed. We look forward to hearing from the Executive Director again at the close of today's observance. Next, we're about to hear from one young woman for whom the word impossible does not exist. We know how important it is that young women and girls are encouraged to enter STEM fields. That's science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. When ventilators were becoming scarce in Afghanistan during the outbreak of COVID, Somaya Faruqi, who was 17 years old at the time, and the rest of the Afghan Girls Robotics team developed a low-cost and open-source ventilator prototype to support their country's healthcare system. Somaya is one of the many remarkable young women around the world who are contributing to the COVID-19 response. Let's hear from her now.
Excellencies, respected dignitaries, men, women, and especially young girls around the world. There are millions of girls around the globe who are curious. Girls love science, number, engineering, and technology, but who are deterred by harmful gender stereotypes, by lack of support, and also unequal access to education and technology to pursue a future in the STEM field. It's unfortunate that even in 2021, girls face many barriers in their pursuit of education, especially when they choose to study STEM. Globally, 132 million girls remain out of school, the number that harms every individual living in a society, including men and boys. Investing on girls and their education is a big benefit to all. And how else can we shape our future if not together? A common stereotype that we face as girls and women in STEM is that we are genius. What I would like to say to every girl that listening today is you don't need to be genius in order to succeed as an engineer, a doctor, a researcher, and a mathematician. What girls need is equal right and opportunity to study, and also encouragement of their family members, teachers, society to pursue their interests. We need freedom to experiment, to learn, and be creative. Engineering for me is about endless possibilities. It's about designing new technologies that help all people. It's what our team, Girls Robotic Team in Afghanistan, did 1 year ago. As COVID-19 cases increased in Afghanistan and also the ventilator were becoming scarce in our country, so we prototyped an open-source low-cost ventilator to support COVID-19 patients. It wasn't an easy task for us. We didn't have enough money and also market access to get the parts, so we used card parts instead. Through the support of digital citizen funds and our community, we built many robots like UV robot, spray robot, and also an online game and another innovation approach that enable us to fight with coronavirus. It took about 5 months to finalize these devices, and finally we did it. STEAM is for all girls around the world, especially girls with big ideas to change the world. On this International Women's Day, I would like to say to every girl that believe on yourself and have faith on your abilities in STEAM and education. And never give up and do your best.
Thank you, Somaya. You are such a motivation to all of us. You prove what difference one person, or in your case, one team, can make. You saw a need in your community, and you and your team literally invented a solution with the resources that you had available around you. Thank you also for mentioning the importance of giving girls the opportunity to study in STEM and have the space to experiment and to be creative. We must have faith in our abilities. Well said, Somaya. And now, it's time for some entertainment and a chance to meet another incredible young changemaker. Our first musical performance today is an inspiring 13-year-old singer-songwriter, and actress from Atlanta, Georgia, in the US, who overcame a serious illness when she was only 4 years old, resulting in her needing a kidney transplant, which she received from her mom just 7 years ago. Along with being an ambassador for the National Kidney Foundation, Sepsis Alliance, and World Women Foundation, she is also known for being the youngest runner-up ever on America's Got Talent and the only contestant to receive 2 golden buzzers. Today, she will be performing her new single, Looking Up. Please give a warm welcome to Angelica Hale.
I'm just a girl, you may think I'm at a disadvantage, going out into the world, but I think I'm gonna take my chances. Cause no one ever change a thing by being too afraid of a dream. So if I'm ever feeling down, I know that it's part of the journey. I look up to the stars in the sky, I look up and I feel so inspired to push every limit like all of the women before me. I look up in the face of my fear, won't give up till they know I was here. Won't stand in the shadows, cause she fought the battles before me. And she's looking up too. And she's looking up too. Use the magic of your voice and tell them what you stand for. Cause we don't change the world when we whisper, we change it when we roar. If you take the time to see that all you gotta do is believe. There are highs and there are lows, but the power's in finding the beauty. Oh yeah, I look up to the stars in the sky. I look up and I feel so inspired to push every limit like all of the women before me. I look up in the face of my fears, till they know I was here. Won't stand in the shadows, cause she fought the battles before me. And she's looking up, I am her and she is me. The ladder keeps on growing. Oh, then one day you'll become the hero that keeps it going. I look up to the stars in the sky. I look up and I feel so am so excited to be here with you all today. Thank you so much to UN Women for having me here and allowing me to perform for you guys. I've been singing ever since I was very, very little, and to me, music is life. This song, Looking Up, is extremely personal to me, and I'm so excited that I'm able to release this song to the world today on International Women's Day 2021. I believe that we all need a hero to look up to and that you're never too young to start pursuing your dreams. This past year has been a big struggle and, with COVID-19 affecting so many people all over the world. But I'm encouraged and inspired by the many amazing women that I've seen lead the way by contributing so much on the front lines of this pandemic to leading much of the successful vaccine development. I believe that us women are strong and that we can accomplish anything that we set our minds to. Thank you guys again so much for having me here today, and enjoy the rest of the program.
Wow, what an incredible voice. I have chills. I hope we all feel inspired to push all the limits, like all of the women before us, and not give up. That's such a powerful message. Thank you, Angelica. Thank you for your boundless energy and the difference you continue to make for people around the world. Speaking of people who make a difference around the world, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge all of you in the audience who have joined us here today to celebrate the rights of all women and girls in all their diversity. I also want to thank the staff, consultants, interns, and volunteers of UN Women and of the UN as a whole who work every day to make the world a better place. Few people realize that UN Women is only 10 years old, and in those 10 years, it has already accomplished so much around the world. Even its creation itself was such a victory and came from the hard work of feminists who had advocated for years. So I just want to take a moment to recognize this and thank them and thank all of you for all your efforts. We are now moving into the next part of today's celebration, which will be a panel discussion moderated by a renowned disability rights activist. Eddie Ndopu is a South African award-winning, internationally acclaimed activist, humanitarian, and change maker. Eddie was diagnosed with spinal muscular atrophy at age 2 and given only 5 years to live. Now, at age 30, he has been appointed by the Secretary General of the UN as one of 17 eminent global advocates for the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs, and aspired to be the first wheelchair user to travel into outer space. We are absolutely thrilled to have you join us today. Eddie, over to you.
Thank you, Sophia. I am absolutely delighted to be moderating this really important discussion today, women's leadership in a COVID-19 world. It's no secret that the global health crisis has illuminated for all of us both the centrality of women's leadership and their contributions to society, but also, and perhaps more importantly, the ways in which this constituency and segment of society continues to bear a disproportionate burden. As we look towards the global recovery, it is really important that we amplify the voices of women so that the recovery is truly inclusive and truly sustainable. Joining me today are some remarkable women leaders who are really ushering us in a new discourse around what that recovery might look like. I'd like to kick off with a discussion with Her Excellency Katrin Jakobsdottir, the Prime Minister of Iceland. Thank you, Madam Prime Minister, for joining us. You have been a champion for gender parity and gender equality for a very long time. I would like you to really help us make sense of the current historical moment that we find ourselves in. Could you speak a little bit about what is often referred to as the parallel pandemic or the shadow pandemic, the ways in which women and girls continue to really be disproportionately impacted?
Well, thank you. And it's a great honor to be here with you today. So thank you for having this discussion, which is important because, as you say so rightly, we have a lot of dark sides of this pandemic, not that this pandemic has a bright side, but the dark sides maybe that we aren't talking too much about is the pandemic really concerning violence against women. We are seeing a backlash when it comes to domestic violence. We are seeing that here in Iceland, and we are seeing it everywhere in the world, really. And we have also seen an increase in poverty among women, and we have also seen women carry a disproportionate amount of responsibility in taking care of vulnerable relatives, family members, and others, doing this really in unpaid work, what we could call maybe the caring economy, where women really take these burdens of caring for the vulnerable groups around them. So this is a dark side of this pandemic, which is really affecting gender equality. But at the same time, because we must remain optimistic and we must remain hopeful, we are also seeing this pandemic, COVID-19, showing us the importance of women who are the frontline people in the health sector, really going through the day, taking risks to really carry really the responsibilities of the health sector, and showing us really the importance of the work they are doing every day. So I think one of the lessons we can take from this pandemic is really the importance of women working in the healthcare sector, in the hospitals, everywhere in the front line. And it's so important that we take that lesson and really stand guard for all these systems around the world, which are so important for all our societies. And also, we need to remember that often, even though the majority of healthcare workers are women, decisions are often made by men. And this is one of the things that we need to do. We need to have more women making decisions in that sector as well as any other sector.
Thank you, Madam Prime Minister. I'm pleased to turn the conversation over now to the young activists that we have in our midst. Shea Bastida, one of the leading voices around climate justice. She is a key figure in the Fridays for Future movement and has really been at the forefront of this discourse. Shea, thank you for joining us. You are a climate justice activist, and at the age of 18, you have really underscored the importance of intersectionality in this movement. Could you speak a little bit about the difference between climate justice and the climate action discourse? Are those two separate discourses? What are some of the differences, and what does that mean in the context of the fight for gender equality?
Well, firstly, thank you so much for opening this space to share, my thoughts, and thank you so much to the Prime Minister for sharing her thoughts, which were really insightful. And I think you have asked one of the most important questions there is in the climate movement, because there has been a lot of discourse, especially at high level, institutions, governments, about climate action, which basically means looking at the amount of carbon in the atmosphere, how we can draw down the carbon, move on to cleaner technology. And even though this conversation is really important to have, and we really need it to lower our overall emissions and our temperature, we need to also think of how people are affected locally. So what does that mean? We need to think about where pollution is being targeted in. We need to think about the areas that are most disproportionately affected. We need to think of the fact that there will be a climate refugee crisis. We need to think about the fact that women and girls in countries that are facing water scarcity are the most affected because of less access to sanitary products, to sanitation, and sanitary facilities. In countries where it is a culture for women to go get water, these distances are becoming longer, more tedious, and it makes them more vulnerable to dangers. So there are a lot of layers to the climate justice discourse, which basically means that you have to be conscious not only about the climate crisis and how the systems in the climate environment need to be treated, but also climate, social justice, how we can further our rights, our gender equality, immigration visibility, indigenous rights in the fight to building a better world.
Thank you so much. And now I am delighted to turn the conversation to a remarkable multi-award winning Pan-African activist, my dear friend Aya Chebbi, the outgoing African Union envoy on youth. Aya, welcome to this conversation. It's truly a pleasure to be in conversation with you. Of course, this dialogue is happening against the backdrop of the International Day for Women. And as we think about this discussion within the broader context of COVID-19, could you speak a little bit about the work that you've done around the intersection of young people and women, that sort of intersectional approach, and how important that will be as we think about the global recovery, the role of young women's leadership specifically?
Thank you so much, Eddie. It's such a pleasure to celebrate Women's Day with you, with a young feminist, you know, and ally for us. In terms of our work with young women, I think one of the main outcomes that I'm proud of that we have led last year is the Africa Young Women Beijing Plus 25 Manifesto, which we convened about 1,500 African youth from, I think, over 40 countries together in regional consultation and discussions and focus groups. And they came up with 10 concrete recommendations, not only of, you know, the word before COVID-19 pandemic, but also what the inequalities that has been exacerbated by the pandemics are. And I think they were very clear about the demands from economic justice to equal pay, to the criminalization of gender-based violence, to end gender discrimination, sexual reproductive health, mental health rights, education, and so on. And I think it is important now that young people are really motivated and driving equality already. Young women are at the forefront of it, is that we provide the platforms for them to do that. Because I don't think the issue now is whether young women are organized or motivated, which has been always a question. But I think what is important now is our spaces, the intergovernmental space, the table. Is it diverse enough? Is it welcoming for the young women with disability, for the displaced, for the young women refugee, for the offline young people? Is the spaces or platforms we have, are they fragmented and work in silos, or are they harmonized? So I think it's about really us, in retrospect, thinking of the tools of engagement and maintaining that engagement, because now a lot of young women are also into this space, and we don't want to lose their motivations to continue this fight.
All right. So turning to you, Madam Prime Minister, about this theme of women being at the decision-making table, could you speak about what that means in the context of the global recovery? Of course, in many parts of the world, you know, we're still discussing vaccine rollout and the slow pace of that. But in this discussion around reimagining the world and reimagining the new normal and what the post-COVID world might look like, could you speak a little bit more about what we need to do to ensure that equitable representation and that women's leadership is central to this discourse?
Well, I think if this pandemic shows us anything, it's the importance of having both men and women around the table to make decisions. And we have seen that in many different countries, and my country included, is that when we have both men and women at the table, better decisions are made. And it's my firm conviction and truth that we see better decisions made for society, for the economy, for the environment, when we have both men and women at the table. So I think, and this is really an ongoing struggle around the world. Why we haven't really reached gender equality, why we are still struggling for the SDG number 5 of perfect equality between men and women. And I think when we look at just the results, how countries are dealing with the pandemic, we absolutely see that having an equal representation is one of the beneficial factors for having better decisions made. So that's definitely a lesson to learn from the pandemic.
Turning to you, Xie, flowing from that acknowledgement of the relationship between social justice and the ecological breakdown of the planet, what does that specifically mean in the context of the lived experiences of women and girls everywhere? How do we ensure that women's voices are adequately amplified in the context of climate justice?
So, in my time as a climate activist, what I've seen is that the most amount of organizers are actually young girls. Just in the organization that I co-founded, We Earth Initiative, over 90% of the participants who volunteered and who make up our main organizing team are girls from around the world who are willing to put in the work for a restorative future. And I think that this is a very important conversation between the need for both feminine and masculine energy in a space, because both men and women can have feminine and masculine qualities. And that is what makes, that is what will make the movement flourish. The fact that we have two perspectives, and right now that those perspectives are being very readily embodied by women and girls, but we need to also teach our male counterparts to be able to carry those values as well, because there are values of regeneration, values of imagination, values of not conforming to any limitations that we have to solving the crisis. So, in all, I feel like in the climate movement, the most important thing that we need to advocate for right now is education on climate justice and just education for women and girls, which is one of the solutions that can help us advance the most in our climate goals.
Turning to you, Aya, you've said something that really just struck me. It's about thinking about the tools of engagement. It's no longer a question of whether or not young people, young women specifically, are motivated or interested or have the capacity. I think we've really graduated from that discourse. But are the tools fit for purpose, Aya? I mean, we've spoken a lot about the need to reimagine the world. We are rethinking what we mean by normal. And so one would imagine that there are implications for the public policy in that. So could you speak a little bit more about whether the current tools that we have are fit for purpose, whether they're actually going to be able to deliver on the kind of meaningful representation that you speak about?
We made a lot of progress, and me and you, that the past decade we've been fighting for space. So everything we've been fighting for, we want a seat at the table, we want youth spaces, we want to have our own consultations, our own advisory groups, and that's what has been created. But that also kind of isolated youth issues and young women voices, and it's not mainstreamed. And something I always talk about the past 2 years is intergenerational co-leadership, and I think that's where the tools of engagement should become. Our spaces should all become intergenerational. There is no one generation or the other that can fix the world issues. We are inheriting the generational injustices, and there needs to be some form of generational accountability. And so I think the tools that have been created so far has been to kind of like, how do we engage this group? How do we provide a space for this group? But it ended up isolating these voices into different groups that then have their own agenda. And back to your first question of intersectionality, we ended up not having that intersectional movement. And I think for the feminist movement, for the movement to fight for gender equity and equality to succeed, it needs to be intersectional. intersectional, and it needs to be intergenerational. So what I really hope to see as tools to engage meaningfully young people, to maintain their engagement for next generations, is that we move away from this idea that we have the young women spaces, we have the senior women, we have the young people, we have the leadership, the institution. It's really created this distrust. So for us to build this trust, we need young people to co-chair meetings. We need young people to be, at presidential level, at the county level, at the council level, at parliamentarian seats. We need really this intergenerational collaboration and co-leadership to work, not only at the policy discourse, but really on the ground. We need to really see the young people not only at the table or having a seat, but actually taken seriously and making decisions with other generations. So their wisdom and our innovation, this is how it's going to work. And the pandemic is a great example of that. If we have given young people the seat they deserved and the tools, maybe we would have handled this pandemic differently.
Absolutely. I love that. Finally, Prime Minister, we're having this discussion against the backdrop of International Women's Day, and there are emerging leaders, young people, young women, specifically watching and listening to this conversation. If you could impart wisdom or advice for young people, young women who are watching and want to follow in your footsteps, what message would you leave them with?
Well, I think, the most important thing is to build a society which really functions for both men and women. That women and men take equal responsibility in raising children, that we have good early education system, that we have a society which works for families so that people don't have to choose between having a career and having a family. And this is something that has been important for me, and I look to women of older generations who were fighting for exactly this: shared parental leave between parents, early education for children to increase the possibilities for women of participation in the labor market. And we need to have a society which really has equal opportunities for all, men and women. I think one of the systematic failures that we need to address, and one of the reasons for that we have still societies which don't have gender equality, is the fact that we are still dealing with gender-based violence. I mentioned this as the dark side of the pandemic: an increase in gender-based violence, an increase in domestic violence. And this is a systematic problem that we need to address systematically. We need to start early on in kindergartens talking about gender, talking about violence against women, and do not think of it as something that just comes naturally, because we can actually make that change. And when we erase violence against women, we will move fast towards gender equality. So this is a very firm conviction I made. And I think the young people today, and I'm not one of them, but I think they are really ready to make that change. And I think we have seen that when it comes to the climate crisis and the very strong voice of young people around the world. I think it's very important that that strong voice will also resonate when it comes to issues of gender equality, because this generation has an enormously open mind and also great opportunities to be that change that we need.
Fantastic. Madam Prime Minister, thank you so much for your time. I know you're short on time, but we are truly grateful for your insights. And particularly against the backdrop of women's leadership in COVID-19, your insight is tremendously valued. So I thank you so much. Xie, I'd like to pose the same question to you that I posed to the Prime Minister. We are having this discussion on International Women's Day, and there are many young leaders, women, men, who are watching and who've been inspired by your journey and your advocacy. If you were to impart knowledge and leave a message for this generation of young leaders, what would you say as somebody that's been in this space, who continues to be in this space and agitate for meaningful change? What is it that you would say to people who are also just as passionate about seeking to make change?
Well, thank you so much for that question. And I have two things to say about this. The first one is that we are usually told that we need a seat at the table, that we need to be invited to certain spaces in order for our voice to make a difference. And the truth is that, you know, there's times where we need to make our own tables, our own discussion environments, our own safe environments. And that is really what, you know, a lot of activists have been doing around the world, creating their own chapters, creating chapters that have love in them and that have innovation in them. So that is my first advice. If there is no place where people are inviting you because of whatever reason, you can create your own, and you can start being a leader because it's in you. The second thing that I would say is that when I look at my upbringing, I know that my